colleagues. To my left, my original partner on this initiative, Joyce Beatty from Ohio, Bobby Rush from Illinois, John Katko from Syracuse, New York, and of course Glenn G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania, my other friend and colleague on this important issue. We're here to talk today about the reintroduction of the National Collegiate Athletics Accountability Act. The NCAA's stated goal is to protect the welfare of the student athlete with a, quote, increased emphasis on both athletics and academic excellence, unquote. Bluntly, the NCAA has failed, in my view. Has failed miserably, actually. And when you look at the facts, the NCAA is the largest collegiate athletic association in the United States. Over 1,000 colleges and universities participate in the association, which holds significant power over 430,000 student athletes. The NCAA generates nearly $900 million in revenue per year, 90% of which comes from broadcasting college athletic events. This is not a small nonprofit organization promoting the education of student athletes. Today, college athletics are big business, generating on average $6.1 billion per year in revenue. This multi-billion-dollar industry is based on the blood, sweat, and tears of student athletes looking for a way to get a quality higher education while participating in the sports they love. The overwhelming majority of student athletes will finish their athletic careers upon graduating from college. Many of these student athletes attend a college or university on the promise of a free or discounted education in return for their athletic participation. But the NCAA's rhetoric about education falls far from the reality of their actions. Long gone are the days of a guaranteed four-year scholarship. In 1973, the NCAA restricted athletic scholarships to 1 year at a time for all practical purposes. These scholarships can be revoked at any time by coaches and have to be renewed on a year-to-year basis by the university. Those scholarships can be taken away for non-academic or non-behavioral reasons. So consequently, if a student athlete gets injured or doesn't fit into a new head coach's scheme, they could lose their scholarships. More importantly, that student loses his or her his opportunity, in many cases, his or her opportunity at finishing their college education. One-year scholarships have created a culture that cares more about maximizing the chances of winning the next game or championship rather than educating students. If you think the NCAA is concerned about the welfare of the student athletes, take a closer look at how it handles alleged violations of its bylaws. Too often we hear another news story about how the NCAA has mismanaged another investigation, whether it's at Miami or North Carolina or wherever. But compare how the NCAA investigated the University of Southern California, Ohio State, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Penn State, University of Miami, and Syracuse University. The disturbing amount of infraction enforcement process it grows with each new investigation opened. The time has come for the NCAA to get back to its original purpose. Our legislation's provisions will make that happen. Specifically, the NCAA Act protects the student athlete by requiring annual baseline concussion testing for athletes participating in certain sports. With the growing national concern over the severe after effects of concussions, it is our responsibility to ensure that the NCAA takes steps to limit the head injuries suffered by student athletes. It requires mandatory four-year scholarships for athletes participating in collision or contact sports, and these scholarships cannot be revoked on the basis of athletic skill or an injury suffered by a student athlete. Requiring these four-year scholarships will shift the emphasis of the NCAA back to its stated purpose of protecting student athletes while ensuring academic excellence. Student athletes in these sports will no longer have to be afraid that an injury or a new head coach will signal an end to their academic pursuits. If the NCAA honestly cares about raising graduation rates of its student athletes, our legislation, I believe, is part of the solution. The NCAA Act will provide greater and more certain due process rights for those student athletes and colleges or universities accused of violating NCAA bylaws. Our legislation accomplishes this goal by requiring a formal administrative hearing, not less than one appeal, and any other due process procedures deemed necessary by the Secretary of Education. Finally, the bill establishes a presidential commission on intercollegiate athletics to review, analyze, and report to the President and Congress on the interaction at athletics and academics. And you should note that Congressman Rush and former Congressman Jim Moran of Virginia were very active participants in creating the concept of the Presidential Commission on intercollegiate athletics, modeled not in a similar way to the U.S. Olympic Committee back in the 70s. So essentially, the financing of intercollegiate athletics, the recruitment and retention of student athletes, oversight and governance practices, health and safety protections for student athletes, and due process and other protections related to enforcement of student athlete rules and regulations. This is what we're trying to achieve. Finally, I wanted to say the need for this action is an imperative. We're talking about the health and safety and the education of hundreds of thousands of student athletes. We're also talking about ending the NCAA's kangaroo courts, botched investigations, and also provide due process rights for student athletes and member institutions. These are our young people, our kids. We owe it to them to fix the NCAA, get them refocused back on education, and hope that our colleagues will join us in this effort. Now, at this time, I'd like to turn this over to a good friend and colleague from Ohio, Joyce Beatty.
Thank you so much to my colleague and my friend for having us here and for sponsoring this bill. I'm also honored to have my other colleagues join us. Let me start by saying Charlie Dent has been out in the forefront of this bill and has given a great overview of it. I think it's important for me to say that this legislation is to make sure that student athletes come first in collegiate athletics. Concussive injuries and their long-term impact, as well as the preservation of scholarships for athletes, have grown in the public consciousness and conversation. I want to make sure that we protect the health and safety of our students and ensure fair and transparent enforcement of all NCAA rules. I am proud that our work in the last Congress spurred the ruling of the Big Ten Conference schools to guarantee that any athlete who received an athletic scholarship will be able to keep the award until they graduate. Many will ask the question, why is Congress getting engaged in this? The reason is talk is not enough. And you've heard some of the history of what has happened to these young folks in colleges playing sports, whether it's a concussion or whether it's the scholarship. And that has not always been the case. Prior to around 1976, athletes, as long as they were matriculating in their university program, they were able to keep their scholarships. So I am very concerned about the scholarships and want to make sure that we go back to that. For me, it's all about health and safety of the athletes and that we're being very transparent with their due process. You've heard the components of this bill and the new component in this bill establishing the Presidential Commission. I think it's very important that that commission will review and analyze and report back not only to the president, but to Congress on the interactions of athletics and academics and financing of intercollegiate athletics. I think it's also important for us to know that when you look at the NCAA Act of 2015, it continues to require annual baseline concussion testing for students involved in contact and collision sports. And it's really important because last in 113th, we actually held a hearing and brought in experts from pediatricians to people who had experience with traumatic brain injuries. We had members of Congress who had actually played professional football and had been injured. As a result of that, the outpour of calls from parents and from teammates, the NFL players, the moms, they were all saying thank you to us for putting concussions out front and making sure that we are asking that the universities be responsible for making sure that they are looking at concussions. I can also say in defense on a part of the NCAA, that our work has also been very inspiring, that they hired a neurologist. And we've had the opportunity to meet with the NCAA's neurologist, the opportunity to visit the Ohio State University, and I can say we have been able to see that from their president, who happens to be a physician, the new president, so it's hopeful to me with the university that they will understand that we are going to be moving forward with this legislation, and it is our intent to make sure that our voices are heard because we represent those students and those players. And so at this time, I'd like to say thank you, and we will pass it on to you, GT.
GT, then we'll go to Bobby Rush and then to John Katko. GT.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks to all my colleagues for your work on this important initiative. And much thanks to my fellow Penn State alumnus, Congressman Dent, for organizing the press conference and for continued partnership on this very important issue. Now, it's no secret that for years now, the NCAA has failed when it comes to following their own rules, and has certainly failed when it comes to unduly exerting their perceived powers over college athletics. The Bipartisan National Collegiate Athletics Accountability Act, which was also introduced in the last Congress, will ensure that the NCAA is held to its highest standards possible for providing much-needed accountability and reforms. To help achieve this high level of accountability, the NCAA Act would prevent universities from obtaining Title IV funds if they do not enforce specific rules protecting student athletes' health, education, safety, and due process protections for alleged infractions of association bylaws. For far too long, we've seen the NCAA fail to protect the well-being of our student athletes, and this bipartisan legislation, I think, is a huge step in the right direction to help fix that. I once again want to thank Representatives Dent, Beatty, Katko, and Rush for your support and leadership in this critically important, what I believe to be common sense legislation.
Thank you, GT. Thank you, GT, and that was GT Thompson from Pennsylvania, Glenn GT Thompson. Now we're moving to Bobby Rush, Congressman from Chicago, Illinois. Bobby.
I want to thank you, Representative Dent, and to my other colleagues who are sitting here at the table. I'm not a newcomer to this issue. I introduced the HR 275, and I'm glad to see that bill that I introduced included in this particular bill. But my involvement goes even further back. For those who have some questions about whether or not this is an adequate responsible role for the U.S. House of Representatives, I might remind you that a subcommittee that I chair in the Energy and Commerce Committee, the subcommittee on Commerce, Trade, and Consumer Protection, has legislative jurisdiction over sports, amateur sports, and professional sports. And when I served as chairman over there, we had a number of hearings around the inequities and irresponsible conduct of the NCAA. And in my mind, the NCAA is the last plantation in America. It certainly takes the labor capital, the talent and the skills of its participants under the guise of being amateurs, promises them education, but then it exploits their labor without pay, I might add. And it also, they have found ways to abrogate contracts under the whimsies of excuses. I remember particularly I had a hearing a couple of years ago. I had some professional and collegiate athletes who came and witnessed at my hearing, and I can't ever get the image of a young man, tall man, I might add, who was a basketball player at Oklahoma State University. On the floor, he suffered a leg injury, and he was subsequently removed from the school. His scholarship was rescinded because he could no longer perform at the high level that he had performed when he obtained that scholarship. And so the NCAA is, in my estimation, is a cabal. It should be the national cabal of collegiate athletes, because it's nothing but a cabal. They are profiteering at the expense of our students, at the expense of the education of our students, and also really to the detriment of all of us. I've had numerous meetings with the NCAA, and I have not been given any kind of optimistic proposal from them in a number of years. I mean, I have been on this, I've been working on this issue for many, many years. It's high time that they stop their wayward ways and really adhere to the high principles of what amateur athletes is supposed to care about. If in fact they abandon their premise, their pledge to be to achieve the highest standards of amateur athletes, then they should turn pro. They should cease using amateur in their definition of who they are, because somebody's getting paid, and they're getting paid in ways that is shocking. Coaches are being paid, presidents, athletic directors are being paid, presidents of the university are being paid, and these athletes, I remember so well at one of my hearings, the former New York Knicks and Collegiate Indiana University basketball player Isaiah Thomas, and he testified. He said, "We, when I was in college, we could buy the bagel, but if we put the cream cheese on the bagel, then we were in violation of the rules." And this is almost unheard of in America, you know. So we need to clean up the cesspool. And I want to thank Charlie and my other colleagues here. Well, this is an attempt to try to bring some light, shed some light on this abysmal cesspool that's called college athletics in America. And we did it before. The Congress has done this before. We have a remarkable record in terms of taking the NCAA on and making it do what it's supposed to do. And I want to remind you that out of the Energy and Commerce Committee many years ago, Title IX was passed. Title IX was made a level playing field between male and female athletes, women and men athletes, and they had to be funded at the same level because of Title IX, which was congressional action. So we're standing on firm ground. We're standing on legislative history, and we're standing on what's best for the American people. We need to clean up this cesspool called the NCAA, which is nothing but an evil cabal of greedy people who are exploiting our young men and our young women. It's time to stop it right now, and now is the time.
Thank you, Congressman Rush. Let me turn to Congressman John Katko from Syracuse, New York. Don't touch that button.
Thank you, Mr. Dent. I want to thank Mr. Dent for his leadership on this and for allowing me to take part and be a co-sponsor of this bill, something I think is very important. And I do echo the sentiments of my colleagues that the health, safety, and above all, the interests of the student are paramount. I think when the NCAA was formed, the goals were laudable, and that was to take care of the student athlete. I don't think when they formed the NCAA that anyone involved could have ever imagined about the colossal amount of money that has come into the NCAA and how it has changed so much the priorities of the NCAA. And I think that really is the problem, is that it has become a corporate colossus that is more concerned sometimes, I think, with money than they are concerned with the student athlete. I think that's a major point. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the investigations that it conducts. The investigations, there's only two things that I see that are consistent in every single investigation. Number one, Each and every one of these investigations are conducted completely inconsistent, and it seems to be arbitrary, with no real game plan and no real set of rules of how the investigation is going to go, or how it's going to be handled. And the second thing is that athletes get hurt the most in these investigations. How many times have you heard where an athlete who had nothing to do with any of the investigation or any of the problems, in fact, weren't even at the school when the problems occurred, are the ones that are getting banned from tournaments and suffering, having to play the sport with less scholarships and less scholarship teammates on the team with them? They're getting punished more than any of them. Now, I won't go over all the other problems that my colleagues mentioned, but I agree with what their suggested solutions are with respect to the bill, and the bill itself is very good. I just want to highlight a couple of things. I think having due process with respect to investigations is a very good thing, and it doesn't seem to have that right now, and it leads to these arbitrary decisions and arbitrary outcomes that are wildly inconsistent. I think it's very important we have some sort of due process with respect to the universities and students, and you know, I think that's a very important thing. I think this presidential commission also is something that cannot be underscored. The importance of it cannot be underscored. I think it's high time we have an independent panel of people from throughout the American fabric take a fresh look at what the NCAA has become and whether it's going in the right direction or not. No one's saying the NCAA should be disbanded, but it certainly wouldn't hurt for the NCAA to have someone take a fresh look at how they're handling things, because it's clear to me that it's really not got the best interest of the students at heart. How in God's name can you sit in the living room of a 16 or 17-year-old kid and offer them a scholarship and offer them a commitment to come to your school, and then if they don't work out with the plan that you'd like, or they don't turn out to be as good as you wanted to be, their scholarship may be gone. That's just wrong, and it's, quite frankly, it's immoral. And the way they handle investigations, I think, is it's clear to me that they're just not in any way, shape, or form consistent, and that denigrates the entire sport and the entire activity. But make no mistake about it, the NCAA is a corporate colossus, and it's high time that we take a good look at it. I think this presidential commission is going to do a lot to take care of that. So again, I applaud my colleagues for their input on this. I very much applaud Mr. Dent's leadership on this, and I think this is a bill that is well thought out, and it's going to look at the right things, and I'm very proud to be part of it.
Thank you, John. So at this time, we're going to go to questions from the press. We'll start with the press who are here in the room, then we'll go to those who are with us over the phone. So any questions in the room?
Yeah, for all of you, there's been plenty of bills here in the past that have been put forth, including, Charlie, your bill a couple years ago, the NCAA Accountability Act. Number one, what do you think makes this one different? And two, what is your sense of whether there's going to be enough support to create a presidential commission?
Well, first, let me just say that the Higher Ed Reauthorization Act is likely to be considered at some point in this Congress. And that bill will be germane to many of the issues we are raising here. So we are going to keep pushing for both hearings and for attention on many components of this issue. I should point out, too, that there are many people pushing a presidential commission, not just the folks here, but I think there's a great need for this commission along the lines of what we saw with the Olympics back in the early 70s. And I think there's a lot of momentum out there, because I think there's a general sense that the NCAA is incapable of reforming itself. Joyce